Hi, my name is Moti and I'm a senior security consultant for Aladdin Company. Our lecture today is about user-centric computer security, Part 1, Principles. This is Module 2, Lecture 1. So let's see the lecture outline. What we'll speak today will be about computer security goals, of which is information confidentiality, system integrity, and system availability. Threat and attack categories, motivation of insider attacks. When I say insider attack, I mean a person who basically works in the company or that has access to the network from inside. We'll speak about access control, identification, and authentication. Think of identification as the username and authentication as the password or as the token or as the smart card or whatever it is. And we'll speak about permissions, user versus administrator. We have in every operating system, we have a user called administrator and the simple user called user. Administrator basically is a super user which can do everything and has all the permission, and the user is on a need-to-know permission. Whatever he needs to know, whatever he needs access to, he gets the permission. We will finish by doing a case study on the Unix operating system in regards to permissions, in regard to types of users, and also files and permissions. Okay, so let's start. As we see in this slide in computer security number 1, we have some goals of computer security. One of them is information confidentiality, which means prevention of information disclosure or theft. So I want to keep my information confidential. I don't want anyone accessing it because it's my private information. If anyone accesses or I lose the confidentiality of the information, basically a risk can happen, a financial risk or even a live risk to my entity. Another type of security goals is system integrity. System integrity basically is making sure that the maintenance of correct system operation and prevention of system corruption. So let's say I have a Windows box. I need to make sure that the files on the Windows box are not damaged. The files, when I say files, I mean the operating system files, not a Word document or some kind of a cookie file or something like that. I need to make sure that the system integrity is kept intact and no crucial file is being overwritten or erased, thus creating my system basically unbootable. Another computer security goal is system availability. Basically, I need to make sure, I need to guarantee of the system services to users and to other systems. I need to make sure that system services are running. I am able to serve other users. Let's say I'm a web server, I'm a website. I need to make sure that my website is up at all times, because if it's not up, it can mean damage, collateral damage, or a financial damage that if the site is down. Okay, so let's speak a little bit about confidentiality. So confidentiality basically means that I need to assure only authorized access to information. So let's say I have a file that has the records of all the salaries in my organization. I need to make sure that only the members of the finance group would have access to that file, and no other user would be able to browse or snoop or see that file that contains such sensitive information. Another thing about confidentiality is that I need to prevent unauthorized access to information. Like we said before, the finance department is the only one who's able to access this file of the salaries, with the data of the salaries in the organization. So me as a person of member of the IT department group won't be able to access that file. A major threat to the organization comes from within the organization. A recent research that Gartner company did found out that 80% of the attacks on the internet usually comes from inside. So think of it that I have a house, I want to protect the house, I put like 20 locks on the door, I put an amazing alarm system, but in the end someone from inside the house, a member of my house or the maid or whatever, steals an important thing from my house. So thus all the things that I invested in protecting my house from the outside is basically do not suffice, because a person from the inside stole the information or stole the product or the merchandise. Another thing, as we can see in the slide, is that access rights to information should be defined on a strict need-to-know basis. What we said before, it's the least permission a person should have. Let's say a person needs to only read the information, so it would only need to have the read permission, but not the delete permission or the modify permission. I have a sensitive file that I am sure I have the access. I should be able to read it, but it's very crucial that I won't be able to erase the file, because by that I would cause the damage to the organization I work in. Also, as we can see in the slide, attackers can steal only what they have access to. So let's say an attacker did infiltrate the system, he won't be able to steal information that he does not have permission. So even if it is an inside a worker that works inside a company, he will only be able to cause damage of what he has permission to access. Okay, more about confidentiality. As we can see in the slide, it is easier to keep track and to respond to incidents when there are clear security policies. So if I know that a file only needs to have read permission and I see that the file was erased, I can check. It will probably be it can probably happen from someone that has the permission to do it. So it narrows down the search that I need to do now to find out who did that crime. So another aspect of confidentiality is that policies are maintained by a chain of identification, authentication, access control, and accountability. We basically need to maintain a non-repudiation policy that if I see in my log that a user accessed a file or erased a file or modified it, he won't be able to repudiate what he did. He needs to be held accountable for all his deeds and do not say, I was being spoofed or someone did it instead of me. We need to have a non-repudiation policy. So each user should have a unique identifier. Basically, what it means that in an operating system that many users work on, we need to have a unique identifier for each user. We cannot have one user logged on and all other people using his user account, because we won't be able to maintain the non-repudiation policy we mentioned before. Also, each user should be strongly authenticated. Let's say I have a password which is 1234 or ABC123. By that, a remote or a local hacker would be able to come to my console, use my password or guess my password, or even see the sticky note that I have on my monitor and use my password to get authenticated and modify the files or erase the file. And by that, I won't be able to, I would be held accountable for what I did, which I actually did not do. So we need to make sure that each user should be strongly authenticated. We can do that by many mechanisms, such as one-time password or tokens or smart cards, etc., etc. We also need to make sure about confidentiality, that each user should be allowed access to resources based on his or her access control rights. So as we said before, the finance has a file containing all the records about the salaries of the people working in the company. So we need to make sure that only the finance department has read and modify permissions to that file. However, they cannot erase that file, even the finance department. Another thing, we need to make sure that each user should be held accountable for his or her actions, which we mentioned before, the non-repudiation policy. Okay, so let's speak more about confidentiality requirements. We need to ensure that the organization requirements are met by both insiders and outsiders. When I say that, I mean that the policy needs to be the same for the insiders and the outsiders. Let's say I have a third party supporting my company. They need to also have users and accounts in accordance to their access control policy, which give us the opportunity to maintain the non-repudiation policy. Requirements must be given as policies and be imposed on users and on information resources. When I started to work in my company, I got an acceptable use policy to fill out, and I had to sign that I only able to do whatever I get the permission to do, and I should not even try to browse to files that do not belong to my departments. So it's very important, the user education subset, that would know their policy and would know what's permitted and what's not permitted. Also, as we can see in the slide, system should specify which user and groups are authorized to use which information resources. Once again, let's go back to the finance group. Only the finance group can have access to finance files, and vice versa to IT group would not be able to use finance group, and the finance group would not be able to see the IT group folders in the network. We also need to make sure that the system is logging access information to detect when confidentiality is violated, or at least tried to be violated. So let's say I have the folder which I have only read permission to the folder, and I try to delete the file. I will get the access is denied information, but the guys in the IT department needs to know that I try to do that, because it is a violation of the confidentiality principle. Okay, so let's speak a little bit about integrity requirements. Integrity basically means that system developers should warrant that there are no security bugs in the system. We need to make sure when I'm developing a software that I write it using safe practices and do not leave holes or gaps or backdoors inside the program, thus making the system have integrity. Also, system should be configured properly. A Windows box should not be configured using the default permissions, because in the default permission of Windows box, all users have all access to all folders. So we need to make sure that when we configure a system, it's being done when security is in mind. Another thing about integrity, that is, system should be monitored to verify that nothing has gone wrong. So we need to verify and maintain all the time to make sure that crucial files and crucial processes are not being stopped or killed, and that files of operating system are not being erased or overwritten. You need to make sure that the integrity is being kept of the system. Let's speak a little bit about availability requirements. Availability requirements mean that systems should be always available. So let's say I have a website, which is a news website or some kind of e-commerce website. If a user goes to the e-commerce website and sees that the page is not loading, that's it. I lost that user. He would go to my competitor. So we need to make sure that system should be always available, because that means time and it means money. So every second that my system is not up and running, I lose a lot of money, and I lose expensive customers. A family of attacks known as denial of service attempt to bring the system down or to block access to the system. We mentioned before in module 1 about all kinds of worms, such as the Code Red worm or the Morris worm, that their main purpose was to harm the availability requirements. What they did, they sent an exhaustive amount of packets to the web server, thus the server basically denied service of legitimate users. Also, we need to make sure, as we can see in the slide, that resource quota must be in place to ensure the system always has available resources. So let's say I have an FTP server, which is used for remote user or local user to store files on the server. I need to make sure that one of the users won't put gigs of music or videos and basically clog the servers, thus basically preventing other users from uploading their files and making the availability at risk. Also, as we can see in the slide, we need to maintain resource usage statistics. It also must be part of the security monitoring tools. So let's say a person is uploading a bunch of files. I need to have statistics about what he's doing in order to predict that the systems might not be available in the near future or in the distant future. Okay. So let's speak a little bit about threat categories. we need to make sure that unauthorized users gaining access to the system or its information resources, we need to make sure it's not happening, because if it happens, they can compromise the system. Also, as we can see in the slide, user gaining roles and privileges that are not entitled to basically can cause risk and a threat to the network, because if I have write permission or modify permission on a file that I should not, for example, the files containing the records of the salaries in the company, I can access that file and change the data, and from earning $1,000 a month, all of a sudden I can earn $5,000 a month, and no one will know if they don't have monitoring as they should. Also, as we can see in the slide, users are not accountable for their actions. In the threat, users are not accountable for their actions. We mean that they can repudiate what they did. Let's say a crucial file was deleted. A person can basically repudiate it and say, I did not do it. So someone else used my account. So if we don't use strong authentication mechanisms such as one-time password or smart card, users will be able to repudiate their actions or someone else's actions. Another thing that we can see as a threat is attacks against system and data integrity. Like we said before, if someone managed to erase a very crucial file of the operating system of the Windows, it can basically destroy the operating system, and when the user will try to reboot the system, the computer would not boot up. Another thing that we can see in the slide is attacks against system availability. Like we said before, if I manage to hack into a website, or even to implement a denial of service attack on a website of e-commerce, and the user tries to surf it and does not get the page, he would go to another site. So we need to make sure that the system is available at all times, because every second the system is not available, we lose money. Okay, so let's speak a little bit about attacker categories. We have an outsider hacker, which is basically a hacker impersonating as an authorized user. He impersonates himself as if he works for the company and tries to do stuff as if he's a worker, but basically tries to steal information or maybe erase or modify some sensitive information. On the other hand, we have inside person spying on sensitive system resources. So let's say I work in my company and I want to spy, I want to see how much my friends are making, what's their salaries, or even I want to change my salary. So I would try to access the file in the finance folder and change or erase the finance file. Another type of an attacker category is a malware. To make a long story short, a malware is most likely a virus, a computer program which is trying to steal information or compromise the system. Another example of a malware would be a keylogger system, which basically logs all keystrokes that I'm doing on my computer, thus sending it to a third party, which would be able to use it to steal money from me or use my user or credentials to access the website. So let's speak a little bit about the motivation of inside attackers. We have one type of motivation is industrial espionage, which basically I have a company which has a competitor, let's say in the fields of kitchen accessories, and I hear that next week they're planning to do a press conference presenting a new line of products. So if I get this information in advance and I get some details about it, I as the company, as the competitor, would have the option to do a press release of my own and sell the same products or the same concept of products, making them look like a goons when they do it the next week. Another type of motivation of inside attackers is political beliefs. Let's say I think that my country or the other country is doing something against my political belief. I would try to hack into the system or commit a denial of service attack on their web servers, because I don't want them to propagate their propaganda or agenda to all the other users who believes in that politic agenda. Another type of motivation of inside attackers is disgruntled employees. So let's say I don't like what my management in my company is doing. They decided to do a pay cut of the paychecks. So I want to attack their database, and I want to make damage. I want them to lose money because I am dissatisfied from their deeds and actions. So let's speak a little bit about access control. We have access policy. One element of the access policy is precise access policy. This is a matter of recommendation. We need to maintain a precise access policy that access to system resources is granted to user precisely according to their level of authorization to access this specific resources. Like we said before in the example of the financial folder, only the financial group would have access to the file containing the salaries of all the employees in my company. Also, we need to make sure that we have a confirmed authorization policy. Each resource access is confirmed to be authorized before it occurs. What it means basically that only specific user with specific password from specific group in the organization would be able to access that file or folder or resource, and no other user would be able to do that. Another thing which we can see in the slide is the confirmed integrity policy. We need to make sure that we have authenticity, integrity, and internal consistency of the operating systems are maintained and verified during all phases of operations. Another thing we need to make sure that is precise usage policy. Usage of system resources is governed by quota policies. As we said before, let's say I have an FTP server which is used to upload files of personal files of users. If one user decides all of a sudden to put all of his music collection on the FTP site, it will basically clog all the free space, thus preventing from other users to upload their files to the system. More about access control is identification and authentication. So we need to the identity of user should be verified before he or she is allowed to access system resources. So basically it means that a user should type a username or password or a log on using a secure in a secure manner, such as smart card, or maybe even something called retina scanner log on. So the user would be verified in non-repudiation way that he will know that only he is allowed to log on to the system and won't be able to repudiate his deeds later and held accountable for what he's doing. We also need to make sure, as we can see in the slide, that the identity of the user is the means by which access rights for the user are determined. So what I mean by that I need to make sure that the user logging on have the specific permission to access specific resources in the domain in the network. Another thing which we can see in the slide is the identity of a user is the basis for monitoring and recording the user activities. So whatever the user is doing, whether he's succeeding or not succeeding, even if he's failing to do what he's doing, we need to have a complete record of what he's tried to do or what he is able to do. Another factor is the authentication, is the process of proving the identity of a claimed user. So a user can say that he is the user, but if he's not using the correct password or the correct token or the correct smart card, we do not let him log on to the system and use his permission to the system or to the folders or resources. Identification and authentication are among the most critical security activities in the system. We need to make sure that anyone logging onto the system is identified in a non-repudiation way, that whatever he's doing, we are sure that he is doing, and he won't be able to repudiate it later. Okay, so let's see about identification and authentication in more details. A prerequisite for user login is that the user has a valid account in the system. Of course, when I want to log on to the system, I need to have a user. I cannot log on without a user. So we need to first make sure that a user account is being created. Then Once a user is authenticated, as we can see in the slide, he or she assumes his or her identity in the system. He can get authenticated by various means. He can get authenticated by a password, he can get authenticated by a token, or by a smart card, or by one-time password generator. He can get authenticated by various means of authentication, as long as he gets authenticated by a strong factor of authentication. We also need to control the access to system resources and to make sure that it's being done based on the authenticated identity of the user. So let's say the user Moti accesses the domain. We need to make sure that only Moti can access this specific folder, his home folder, which only be able to access by Moti. Let's speak a little bit about authentication methods. So, something the user knows. This is one way of authentication. A very common example of something the user knows is a memorable data, such as passwords, passphrases, or personal information. In a late survey they did, they found out that the password is usually something that in regards to the user personal life, such as the wife's name, such as the kid's name, such as his social security number, such as his hobbies. Let's say I like tennis, so my password would be tennis. Or something the user is or has. As we can see in the slide, we have many types of biometrics identifiers, such as fingerprints, such as palm geometry, such as retina scan, which is in the eye. It basically scans the retina, or even iris scan, or face recognition, or signature characteristics. We basically ask the user to sign his personal signature before he logs onto the system. And we also even have DNA recognition. So the user puts a little bit of his saliva on a surface, and a DNA recognition is being held. Another thing is something the user holds, such as a token, a physical key, ID card, smart card, or even a cryptographic token. So let's speak a little bit about passwords. Password is the most common secret between the user and the system. Password is used as means to authenticate the user to the system. So we see here in the diagram that the computer asks the username, "What's your username?" The user replies with Mark. So then the system asks back, "What's your password?" And the user gives back the password. Now, if the password is correct, the system would give him a message that is verified, and he will be logged on to the computer or to the system. Here we can see a screenshot of two login screens. This screenshot is from the Red Hat Linux. As we can see here, the user needs to type the username, and in the following screen, if the username exists, it will give him a message that please provide us with your password, or with your token, or with anything else. In Windows XP, on the other hand, you need to put your username and password on the same screen. A funny thing about the Windows XP is when you reboot the computer, you get the last username logged onto the system. So if you think about it logically, it's basically 50% of what the hacker needs. The hacker needs the username and the password. So if by default I'm giving him only the username, I already have 50% of the solution. I just need to guess the password. And as we said before, the password is usually taped in a sticky note to the screen, or it's under his keyboard, or in his drawer next to his desk. In recent surveys they did, they found out that the password is 60% of the time is located up to 2 feet from the user's computer. So we see that the Linux in this point of view is more secure than the Windows. Okay, so let's speak a little bit about access control. We have user-created passwords. It may include words and names. So let's say my name is Moti, and my family name is Seiji, and my wife's name is Nomi. So my password would probably be Moti and Nomi, or Moti Sagi, or something to that extent. Let's say I have kids, or I have a pet. I have a pet, her name is Barbie, and I would give, because I like her so much, my password would be Barbie. Or maybe if I'm trying to be very sophisticated, my password would be Barbie123, which is barely breakable. So it can also include, as we can see in the slide, it can include some personal information about the user, phone number, birth date, etc. So let's say I was born at August 16th, so my password could be 1608 or 1608 Moti, or I can use the birth date of my wife, and something to that extent. Why do I do that? Because these kinds of passwords are easier to remember. I would never forget this password. So let's say I have a system that tried to do it harder for me and asked me to change my password every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So let's say my password now would be Moti. So when they asked me to change my password again, I would probably use Moti1 or Moti2 or Moti3, and in the next time I would use Moti4, and etc., etc. So I'm still keeping an easy to remember password. But these passwords, as we can see in the slides, are not very safe, because anyone who knows me will know that my name is Moti and I have a dog named Barbie and my wife's name is Nomi, would try all these options. This is also called social engineering. We also have machine-created password, which is much more secure. It contains random characters. Because the computer generated it will contain a random string, let's say 1A, B, 3, D, E, F. But these passwords are harder to remember. So if they're harder to remember, so most likely I will write them on a note and tape them to my computer screen or under my keyboard. So it's, from one hand, it's safer to use, but on the other hand, the user would find a way to go around it and actually making it less secure. More about access control, we have some guidelines. Secure passwords should be at least 8 characters long, because we saw before that we mentioned some brute force password crackers. We saw that there's a type that does a brute force search that basically tries all the combination of the letters of the password. So if the password is 2 letters, it would take the average computer around 5 seconds to figure out my password. But if it's 8 characters long, and even if the computer is doing a brute force attack, it would take him up to 2 weeks to find out what's my password. This is another reason why password systems usually ask the user to change his password every 2 weeks. It should also contain both uppercase and lowercase letters, thus creating the cracking software more of a hard time finding out the passwords. The password would most likely contains digit, punctuation marks, control characters. Once again, I want to make it as hard as possible for hackers, which uses the password cracker software, make it as hard as possible for them to crack my password. Also, secure passwords should not contain your name, your child's name, etc., your pet's name. It should not contain telephone number, birth date, etc. It should not be a word in English or any other language, because we saw before that the password cracking systems, softwares, usually have something called a dictionary. And they use all the words in the dictionary, in the Webster dictionary or the Oxford dictionary, all the words in English or even any other language until they get the password right. In order to run the whole dictionary, it takes a computer around 25 seconds to use all the words in the English dictionary of Webster dictionary. It should not be a keyboard pattern like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, QWERTY, etc. If you look at your keyboard next to you, if you have a keyboard next to you, you would see that QWERTY is basically from left to right on the upper left section of the keyboard. So a lot of users, a lot of dictionaries know that users wants to do as simple as password as possible, and knows to try those passwords when they try to hack into the password mechanism. It should not be affixed to the computer screen. Like we said before, that a recent survey found out that the password is usually up to 5 feet from the computer, which is on the screen, under the keyboard, or in the drawer next to your desk. Okay, so let's describe attacks on passwords. There are various ways to do attacks on passwords from the point of view of the hacker. One of them is sniffing communication lines. A hacker can basically sniff the network and see all the passwords running through the lines. You have various software using these techniques as sniffing communication lines and discovering passwords. I want to do now a quick demonstration to show you how a sniffer can expose my passwords to my email systems. So I'm now going to transfer to my sniffer program and show you how to do it. Okay, so here we see this is a sniffer program called Ethereal. We saw it in the previous lectures. What I'm going to do now is going to open a connection to my mail server. And I get a pop-up message saying Microsoft Exchange server, version, blah, 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 ready. Now I'm going to start capturing the packets of the computer and also of the network. Now here I would type user. It says OK. And now I'm going to type my password. OK. Now it tells me unknown user.